today's commentary is on the Time Team programme called The Birthplace of the Confessor. It was filmed back in 2005 in Islip in Oxfordshire, and it was part of Series 13, Episode 10. And I'm joined today by the wonderful Anglo-Saxon expert, Dr. Sam Newton. Sam, hiya.
Hello, Danny. Oh, you're too kind there.
How are you doing?
Very well, very well.
Brilliant. So let's dive straight in there.
Yeah,
Edward the Confessor. That's quite an unusual title. Can you explain a bit more about it?
it's a later title given to him to distinguish him from other early Anglo-Saxon kings like Edward the Elder or Edward the Martyr. He's Edward the Confessor, which basically means he was regarded as a great holy king, great advancer of the faith, but doesn't actually die a martyr's death one way or another.
I see. Okay. And also, actually, I think another thing, let's just do a little bit of background on Edward the Confessor before we talk about the programme. I think a lot of people, the date 1066, everybody knows that date. It's kind of indelibly sort of set in people's minds, isn't it? But actually, if we were to go back to the beginning of that year in 1066, 5th of January 1066,
Yes.
what happened there?
Well, the old king dies after a very long, prosperous reign and a very secure reign. In fact, despite his reputation for holiness, he'd been very active. He'd been out leading the fleet, guarding the coast against the Norwegian threat. And also he loved his hunting. He was hunting right up until December 1065. And so, very active, red-blooded sort of a king, really, which is not how most people look at him.
No.
You look at him from his sort of picture in the Bayeux Tapestry or as a confessor. But
And so,
yeah,
so Edward the Confessor dies January the 5th, and then what?
exactly, with no heirs.
Aha.
No heirs. So it's a bit like, the family business, the old man dies. Now, who's going to get the inheritance? Basically, the choice at that time is between his Norman cousins and his in-laws, the Godwinsons. And I think in any family, that's going to be a difficult decision to make without some kind of problems arising.
Well,
Which of course they did.
absolutely. So let's talk a bit about this then. That what happened. So who were the Godwinsons, first of all?
Godwinsons were a very powerful but quite recently established line of earls who had arisen to power after the conquest of England 50 years previously, 1016, by Canute. So basically they represent a newly established Anglo-Danish aristocracy who'd grown to be very powerful, very acquisitive, and the king was actually married to to Godwin's daughter, and yet the marriage was never produced heirs. Now there are all sorts of theories about that. One is put forward by the Godwinsons themselves that the king was so pious that he couldn't consummate the marriage. He was too holy to get into bed with his wife. Can you believe that? Well, that is the impression that they like to create. It may also be that he never really loved her. Is that the phrase we can use? The Godwinsons, old man Godwin was involved in the murder, the terrible murder of Edward's brother Alfred back in 1036, after the crisis after the death of Canute. So there's always been tension, and old King Edward had done his best to get himself free of the power of the Godwins back in the 1050s, but it all horribly backfired, and they came back more powerful than ever.
So when we're talking Harold Godwinson, we're talking King Harold, aren't we? And so on the January 5th, 1066, Edward the Confessor passes away, but immediately Harold comes along and he's crowned on the same day.
Exactly right. And there's a clear and very strong note of indecent haste there.
Yes.
I mean, he's worried about the cousins. He's worried about the Normans, not least because they do have a stronger genealogical claim. And also than him anyway. But there's also the strong story that is so colourfully told in the Bayeux Tapestry that Harold Godwinson had sworn an oath to William, Duke of Normandy, to do everything he could to help his own William's accession, and he does the opposite. So right away he's convicted of oath breaking, which is why the Pope rules against him. Yeah, there's definitely indecent haste going on there.
To be crowned so quickly, there's obviously, he feels the need.
He and his brothers had lands all over the place, and that's one of the problems. That's what makes the Norman conquest eventually so thorough, is that William the Conqueror acquired all of the lands that Harold Godwinson and his brothers had held. So immediately, all that fell into Norman hands.
So we've got Harold Godwinson, who immediately gets himself crowned King
Yeah,
Harold.
yeah,
So let's talk a bit about the Norman side of this. So we've got William, the Duke of Normandy, haven't we? So what
that's
was
right.
his claim with Edward the Confessor then?
He is, well, I say cousin, really second cousin, which covers quite a few removes. But he is, I say, genealogically much closer because his great aunt, the formidable Lady Emma, had married Edward's father. In fact, Emma was Edward the Confessor's mother, married to old Athelred Unready back in 1002. And so there's a clear Norman connection. Well, Edward the Confessor is half Norman by birth.
Yeah.
Also, he is descended from the line of Alfred. But as well as that, because of the Danish triumph of 1016, young Edward had been forced into exile in Normandy. So not only was he half Norman by birth, he'd spent most of his life in Normandy, which is why when he finally comes to the throne against everyone, having seen off the Danes, it was like the restoration of 1660. There were great hopes for a renewal of Anglo-Saxon civilization with the return of the old line of Alfred, even if he was more than half Norman, and had lots of Norman friends. So, but he could have gone either way. I don't think he was terribly keen on his Norman cousins, but I think he regarded them as the lesser of the evils to the Godwinsons.
So because Edward the Confessor was basically half Norman, for want of better, let's just keep it simple. Basically half Norman, brought
Yeah,
up and raised in the Norman courts. The Duke of Normandy, William, reckons he's got a strong claim to the throne, doesn't
he
he?
does.
That's
Yeah,
why he turns up. And this is how we end up with the Battle of Hastings, isn't it?
exactly. It's a dispute of succession. In the end, it's down to the judgment of, well, not the judgment of the courts, as it is the judgment of God. And that's the dramatic story the Bayeux Tapestry tells, with the oath swearing, the oath breaking, and the judgment of God on the battlefield. And that's an absolutely amazing resource. And it was great. What brought us to Islip, of course, if I'm not preempting your next question, was they had a lovely replica of the tapestry there, which reminded us all of how wonderful that is. But we know from a charter of Westminster Abbey, which was basically, that's where Edward was buried. It was basically became the great royal church, as still is, of course, where the great royal events of the realm have taken place, the birth and marriages, well, not births, but baptisms, marriages and funerals. And his tomb, his shrine there, that sets the great precedent for that. In fact, Westminster Abbey was his great building project. Again, beautifully depicted in the Bayeux Tapestry, along with his death and burial there. That enshrining, so you've got pilgrims will be flocking to pick up on the miracles that are claimed in the life of St. Edward.
Yeah, he was said to have cured a blind man. And also, there was a lady who had an eye infection, and she had a dream that if Edward the Confessor washed her face, she would be healed. And apparently he did so, and she was healed, and so therefore, there were miracles that he's said to have performed.
That's right. Well, every saint has to have a reputation for miracles,
Absolutely,
and especially that's tied up with the old power of the royal touch. It's really quite moving how far that goes back, and is seen as a test of authentic kingship. In the end, it implies that the king is somehow semi-divine, which was, of course, the old belief in a lot of early societies. The kings descend, queens descend from gods and goddesses. Therefore, they're bringing the power to the people like that. And so, yeah, that really does resonate deeply. But the Islip connection was because of this great cult of St Edward that had grown up, focused on Westminster. We have one of the charters, a copy of an early charter, preserved in the archives at Westminster Abbey. It was a lovely moment in the filming of the episode when we went to Westminster Abbey Library at the back of the great nave. We met the librarian and an absolutely wonderful scholar, and he showed us these later copies, and we were able to look at them and read them. That gives us this priceless reference to Islip because it refers to a great deed of gift. I can quote, just bear with me, that he has awarded unto Westminster Abbey, St Peter's, the little the actual wording is courtleaf, which means a sort of a dwelling. Really, it implies a very humble place, which is in keeping with the kind of reputation of a saint who's born very humbly, even though he turned out to be a king. It was geboren in a Binama Yitzleper. I was born in it by the place by the name of Islip, Yitzlip, which is to do with a landing place on the riverbank there. And he says that it's his to give because it was given to him by his mother, the Norman Lady Emma, who's also called Elfgift in English, which is a lovely name, as his first birthday present. And therefore it's mine to give, and it with all the appurtenances that go with it. In others, and it's given to him by his mother because that's where he was born. And so people in Iceland naturally are very interested in that. And so the assumption was that therefore there must be a great royal hall or even a palace there. And you see it on the old maps. It marks earthworks and banks that they all assume were Athelred's palace where the son Edward was born. Once we got there, of course, I mean, if I'm not jumping the gun here, archaeologically nothing started. We couldn't find anything. And it turned out that what were earthworks and lumps and bumps was a later abbey, an abbot's country house, and there probably was a chapel there. We had the excellent architectural expert Jonathan Foyle with us, and clearly evidence of a chapel in resource. But we may or may not have found a few of the tiles. You know how difficult it can be to find evidence of a building if it's already been built over again more than once, and stone gets recycled. But
this was an interesting one because they were looking for two elements that were connected to Edward the Confessor, weren't they? So there's his birth. Obviously, this is where he was born. So they were looking for the Anglo-Saxon palace that he was born in. And Mick makes a really good point at the beginning. You know, Anglo-Saxon palaces are kind of made of wood and wattle and daub, and they don't last very long. You know, they're organic. And then they were also looking for the chapel, which was connected with him once he'd become saint a couple of centuries later. And so it's quite interesting looking for these two things, and they think they've got more chance of finding the chapel because it's made of stone. And actually, without giving too much away, I think they come to a really interesting conclusion. Actually.
They do, they do. But from the point of view of the language, and Mick was onto something straight away, as he so often was. The reference to the structure in which he is built is courtleaf. A coat, a little coat. And it's the same word which gives us cottage and dovecote. It implies actually something small and humble. And that's in keeping with his reputation as a saint.
Yes.
So almost certainly, Mick was saying, and Stuart was saying, actually the royal centres, there's one at Woodstock, there's another one. You know, this is not where you've got a royal centre for the kind of palace people assume was implied by it. And of course, there was never a palace there. It was a humble place in which he was born, in keeping with his sanctity and his humility as a saint.
Interesting. And actually that would therefore make it even more difficult to actually see in the ground, wouldn't it? You know, something very humble just wouldn't last that long because, again,
of course not, and be reoccupied and rebuilt. And so what the absence of archaeology actually reinforced and narrowed the definition of courtleaf. If you look in the older dictionaries, it's sort of the implication it could be a manor house. No, on the basis of those assumptions about places like Iceland, but it's not. It's a humble place. So that I thought was a real linguistic result, but I don't think the archaeologists were too pleased.
No, but I love that. Yeah, I mean that's really interesting use of the language there that they've
exactly.
Yeah.
It's very precise. It's not sort of any old building. It's actually something humble.
Yeah.
A little cottage, a little coat.
Just wondering though, is that because this is written down a couple of hundred years later, isn't it?
Oh yeah, but it's a copy of one from Edward's reign.
Right.
So the original would be something like it's later. 1065 is the. That's a stab in. I mean, it's certainly before the end of his life.
Yeah. Okay.
And it also fits with his great building project, which is Westminster Abbey, that he would endow it with estates. How more appropriate can you get by endowing the estate where the cottage where he was born?
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a priceless and authentic kind of information. It's not something that you would be making up necessarily. Certainly, I mean, his mother would have told him where he was born if he'd given the estate to him as a birthday present.
Yeah, what a thing to get as a birthday present.
Yes, well, she had a lot of money. She's a very powerful lady, very impressive. I mean, she's one of the great women of the 11th century, and she lasts right through to 1052, I think, and buried in Winchester.
Yeah, she really is quite fascinating, actually. There's
really is.
Yeah,
it is interesting.
And it does get complicated, doesn't it? Because there's so many different names to try and remember and so many dates. But
yes,
but it's a great story, isn't it? Really.
Oh, a tremendous story.
Fascinating.
And the sources are so rich for it, not least the tapestry. We have the wonderful Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which survives in several different parallel versions, giving us slightly different angles on events, which really enriches our confidence in the authenticity of what we could derive from it.
Absolutely, yeah.
All good stuff.
Ah, that's great. What's your favourite thing from this Time Team episode then?
Being put in my place by Helen again about pregnancy. It can happen anywhere. Giving birth, and just the joy of the linguistic side of it all. Proved Mick right, and it explained the absence of archaeology, and of course working with Jonathan. He's a great man.
Behind the scenes memories. Anything that particularly comes to mind when you think of filming?
What you mean, that are broadcastable?
Yes.
I just loved it, and not least going from the beautiful landscape of Oxfordshire into London, into the great library at Westminster. That was fantastic, especially going by motorbike there, and the weather was perfect. It was England in May. It was just wonderful. That was one of the great things with Time Team. It took you to places that you'd never get that far into them. Another moment, walking down the street between the chapel and the alleged palace site with Mick. And a bloke came by in a car, complete stranger, stopped, wound down his window and showed a bit of pottery to Mick, who just sort of took it as a completely normal incident and treated to it as just a natural response, and gave him the date of the pottery, and guy said, "Oh, thank you very much," and off he went. A happy man.
Brilliant. I love how he didn't stop him asking for an autograph. It was a date on the pottery that he wanted.
Just happened to be, oh, there's a guy, I'll ask him, he'll know. It's just great working with me. Bless him. Rest in peace.
Well, Sam, it's been lovely catching up with you. And hopefully I'll get to catch up with you on one of our new Time Teams.
Yes, let's fingers crossed. Yeah, I know Tim has great plans, and let's hope it all comes together one day.
Absolutely. But it's all thanks to our Patreons, our Patreon viewers, subscribers. People. So thank you.
Yes.
And,
I know I've had from previous talking to Tim, people who picked up on that, and then come to some of my study days. Speaking of which. We mentioned the Norman Conquest. I'm doing a day on the Battle of Stamford Bridge next Saturday. That's on Woffing Education, www.woffing Education. Book in through Eventbrite. And then, of course, 14th of October, we can't miss an opportunity, an anniversary, the Battle of Hastings, so there's sort of two-parter, really. And there's plenty listed up there as well that you might be interested in. Speaking of Martyr King, St Edmund, St Edmund, along with St Edward, became the great saints of England before St George got the job. So in that way, more authentic, more English anyway.
Sam, lovely to see you again, and let's.
You too, Danny. Keep up the good work. Thanks very much.
Thanks.
Goodbye for now.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
To ensure you catch all the latest updates, please please do subscribe to this channel, follow us on social media, sign up to our newsletter, and join us on Patreon.